Just say hello, vote no. Have you heard of the amendment? What do you have some questions on it? Do you have an opinion on it? And then we start to engage in a conversation, and it boils down. We tell people you're being asked to vote in 2012, and to find out the details in 2013. The details will be coming out through the next legislative session.
That's one of the issues, and I didn't address it in the dissent because I just don't know, and it may be an issue that will come to a subsequent court. I probably won't be there because I reach 70 next May, so I have to retire. But one of the unanswered questions is, with the language in the amendment, is it self-executing? What I mean by that is, do you need legislation subsequent in order to put it in place, or is it self-executing? It is sufficient in itself. And I can almost guarantee you, whoever's in control of the legislature one way or the other, that issue gets debated. And that's a little bit of a problem, I think, that the people have to answer for themselves, is that, and I pointed it out in my opinion, but I didn't want to get on the issue not before us on self-executing. There is a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity. I mean, I'm familiar with voter fraud. I mean, as I said, I've been in Libya and Tunisia talking about it, the Philippines. And we got to be very careful about the concept, even the definition. And I point out in my opinion is that I was dismayed, actually with both sides, for their failure to fully grasp and understand and describe what voter fraud was about. And the other thing people need to look at is that I pointed out, internationally, it's a well-accepted principle that if you can have institutionalized voter fraud, by that I mean is that you can have a system that's designed to purposely restrict or encumber the voting rights of a particular group of voters in order to enhance the voice of another group. And in any constitutional democracy, you have to be very vigilant to watch for is it, fraud, malfeasance, manipulation. Some manipulation of the vote is actually legal. I mean, you watch the ads. That's manipulation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you may not like it, but some of it. But fraud, we've got to watch for that, and you should not disenfranchise one group to amplify the vote of another.
If the voter ID card is supposed to be provided at no cost, what kind of supporting documentation does a voter have to produce to get that card? And is there a charge for the supporting document, the supporting data, the piece of paper or whatever, and who is responsible for paying for it?
Now, are you sure you want to step off into that quagmire? Because I have to go back and deal with a fundamental concept that's where I think is the question on the ballot is going to be misleading. It refers to free ID.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is free ID? The actual question, the actual amendment talks about language that would be at no charge. Is it free if you have to go someplace and get your birth certificate in order to support your ID that you're going to get? Say that you live in Ely, Minnesota, and you have to drive to Virginia or Hibbing to get it, or you live in a western Minnesota location where the courthouse is only open on an afternoon every 2 weeks, or in Wisconsin where they showed that there were some courthouses only open 4 times a year. Is that you've got to drive there, you've got to get it, and oftentimes, or I think actually former Governor Carlson pointed out, is you have a birth certificate that says baby boy. Is that going to be sufficient for you to get this, quote, free ID? And I think that's a real question that bothered me as I looked at the use of free, because it's not free.
You mentioned birth certificate. I can recall when I got...
What do you got there?
My passport.
me see.
Yeah, and I'll talk while you look at that. When I got my first passport, I had to provide a original birth certificate. I had a baptismal certificate, and I had some other kind of certificate from the hospital. I did not have a birth certificate that had been properly stamped. And I grew up in a big city. I was born in a big city, Detroit, Michigan. But it was so long ago, this is before computers, and I wrote to the department, correct department in Michigan, saying I needed an original birth certificate. They had to search their paper records, and it took some months. And then I had to pay for the passport, which is the gold standard usually as a personal ID.
I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you. There are any number of commentators that have basically said your passport will not be sufficient for you to vote. Now, I mean, having traveled recently, Libya and Tunisia, I mean, it's great when you get back on United States soil, and this is your ticket to get back in the country. But what's defective about this is, as some of the commentators say, it doesn't have your address. This is one of the few documents that proves citizenship. Driver's license doesn't prove citizenship, any other IDs, but it doesn't have your address. Oh, I see that I looked, and I see that you wrote in pencil in there your home address, but that doesn't count because that's put in there by you. So that's one of the ambiguities as to what is going to constitute proper identification. I would guess as a minimum you might have to, if the state to provide some type of ID, bring your passport and some evidence that you live in South St. Paul there in order to get a separate ID.
So I could get in and out of Russia as I did last spring.
Can't get in, you can get out with that.
Yeah,
you can get back into our country.
But I can't get in and out of a voting booth with this.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
But legitimate questions have been raised whether a passport will be sufficient because it doesn't have your address on it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are some of the unanswered questions. That's why I think it's a good thing that you're doing this show, is that, I mean, you're advocating, I can't, but at least people should understand the consequences of what's going on here.
Okay. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Back in college, you were up here, and the rest of us were down here. Yeah. But I am enough of a student of legal matters to look for the names of justices of a decision. In the dissent, I saw Justice Alan Page's name, and I saw your name. But for the majority, the four who were in the majority, I didn't see their names. How come? And how common is this?
I mean, I see you have here, I mean, this book from the decision, I mean, it's the Coleman-Franken decision.
Yeah.
And there were 5 of us on the panel at that time. 2 were disqualified because they sat on the canvassing board. The opinion that we issued on Coleman-Franken was per curiam. Now, that was unanimous.
Per curiam mean?
For the full court.
For the full court.
Some people say this Norwegian judge per curiam, but it's a Latin term, per curiam, for all of us. And in the Coleman-Franken is that was absolutely the opinion that was drafted by all 5 of us. I've never seen such a magnificent and hard collaborative effort on an opinion. The majority does have the option sometimes to issue it per curiam. You will know who the dissenters are because Page and I sign on dissents separately. And I wouldn't raise too much of an issue about it. It basically sends the messages that the opinion is more a collaborative effort of all of those in the majority. So, I mean, people try to read too much into that, and I wouldn't.
It bothered me because I don't know the names of all the Supreme Court justices offhand.
You have to take one step further to find out who. You know that Justice Meyer was recused.
Yes.
And so but don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. It's a bit about how courts do their business, so you can find their names easy enough.
Okay, I have about a minute before I want to go into my closing. You mentioned this book. This is not Florida. How Al Franken won the contest against Norm Coleman. How did the author Jay Weiner come up with the title? This is not Florida.
Well, I don't know if we have enough time. You can look at it on page 114, 115, but it came from questioning at the oral argument, and I had said, Paul, don't ask questions right out of the box. But the attorney, Roger Magnuson, started out by saying is that the canvassing board met on a certain date, immediately made a right-hand turn and headed towards Florida. I'm a Minnesota native. My ancestors came here in the 1850s. Anderson Lakes out in Eden Prairie is named after me. I love this state. This is a great state. Garrison Keillor is right. I mean, everybody here is above average. So when you come to our court, it's not a good strategy to start out criticizing the state of Minnesota or its institutions. And so I said, counsel, I know you've been to Florida, but this isn't Florida. All right, this is not Florida. Yeah. This is Minnesota. This case happened in Minnesota. Try the case in Minnesota, not Florida. So the author liked that. But I'm proud of the point that he's making there. He said they kind of messed up, and it was a mess in Florida. But this isn't Florida. Minnesota knows how to do it right. Took us a little time, but the Minnesota procedure was uniformly praised. And juxtaposed to Florida said, Minnesota did it right. Okay, thank you. At this point, I want to thank our award-winning director, Mary Benner, and her all retiree crew for making Voices of Experience possible, and Voices of Experience being produced by the Minnesota State Retiree Council, afl-cio. And a special thanks to our guest today, very thoughtful, as always, Justice Paul H. Anderson of the Minnesota Supreme Court. You do have me with hello, Dan, is that this friendship is deep and much cherished. So in the closing comment that I want to make, and I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to our viewers at this point. As people prepare to vote, I would ask people to consider two basic thoughts. One, who is hurt by the proposed voter restriction amendment? I've already mentioned the elderly, the people who are serving in the military and have to secure absentee ballots, or anybody who has to secure absentee ballots. The election day registrants. What's going to happen to them? We don't know. People with lower incomes. How are they going to be able to provide documentation down the road? Vulnerable voters, the homeless, the veteran who has returned and has not found his place back in society yet, the women in battered shelters on a temporary basis, fleeing untenable conditions, or those who are not in a shelter but are living with a girlfriend or a mother or a sister or somewhere. These vulnerable people. Rural voters who have to drive great distances, and especially young voters. Between the time I was 18 and the time I was 27, I lived in 19 different places. Voter ID, change of address, yeah. So, second point, who should have the right to vote? Male citizens, female citizens, black citizens, white citizens, Latino citizens, Asian citizens, Protestant citizens, Catholic citizens, Jewish citizens, Muslim citizens, atheist citizens, people who are 18 years and older who are qualified to be citizens. Citizens all. And I hope that you join me in voting no on the proposed voter restriction amendment. Thank you for watching,
and we'll be continuing with our series of programs on public policy issues.